will you wave at us if we're not doing a good job?
Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. We might give it another second just to see if we have a few more folks come in. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. We'll get started and we'll... There's an alert. The hot dogs are going away. Would you mind pulling that door closed? Great. Well, welcome, everyone. We're saving the best for last, right? Glad to have you here, and if others join us, they'll be welcome in the room as well. My name is Stacy Hagan. I'm a career Chief People Officer and Operations Executive in high-tech industries, mid-sized publicly traded companies. My one I spent a lot of years at was Earthlink, and then most recently at SecureWorks, which is a global cybersecurity company. While I was at those companies, served on the board of TAG. I've been the chairman of the board of TAG and served on a variety of committees through the years. One that I'm particularly proud of has been the last 2 years I have co-chaired TAG's Social Justice and Equity Task Force. And Larry mentioned what we've just launched, the Bridge Builders program, on the main stage today. We're very excited. Dr. Loretta Daniels is here. She is now executive director of that program. So those are some of the things I've been working on lately that I'm really proud of and excited about what we can accomplish. I'm also really thrilled to be able to moderate this panel of experts to talk about one of the biggest problems that organizations have today, which is how to find and keep great talent. And that's talent of all types with all skills. I don't know a single industry that's not affected by the talent shortage. And it's also figuring out how to increase diversity of our talent. And what are the techniques for doing that? And if anybody has the answer and the secret sauce, you won't have it for long, right? Because many people will be coming after you to get it. So that I have a little intro on me. I want to let our panelists introduce themselves as well. And I'll start with just to my right, Maria. Would you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
Sure. Hello. Again, I'm Maria Calhoun. I'm the Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Atlanta Housing Authority. I have about 20 plus years, we're going to leave it at that, in the human resources field, managing, recruiting, retention, training for publicly traded organizations to government agencies now. So thanks for having me.
Hi, Stacy, and I'm very excited to be here. Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Daniel. I'm the CEO and founder of Inclusive Diversity. We are a woman and minority-owned IT and healthcare staffing company. We partner with mid- and Fortune-sized companies to help with their diversity hiring needs. As a woman of color, I have faced numerous struggles in my past work experience, and so I wanted to make a difference in that industry, and after a decade of working as a recruiter and in the healthcare industry, I decided to start my own company, and that's how we started Inclusive Diversity right here in the backyard of Atlanta. And one of the main features that we focus on is to make workforce equitable to all of us. My onshore and offshore team, we are certified diversity recruiters, which means we have tips and tricks to help you find those diverse candidates. In other words, we are experienced, very good experienced stalkers.
Thanks, Rachel. Hey, Michelle.
Great to be here. I'm the little odd person out. Started my career as a civil engineer, building the power grid out on dirty white pickup trucks out in the middle of nowhere. I was that person. But I started a tech company called Positive Hire because there's a huge issue with keeping engineers like me. About a third of women of color leave their engineering career. So I founded Positive Hire really to connect Black, Latina, and Indigenous women who are experienced scientists, engineers, and technology professionals to management roles. What often happens, we see at the very end of the pipeline, younger women leave because they do not see anybody that looks like them. And they do not believe they belong there. They do not believe they have an opportunity there. So what Positive Hire does is take women like me who drop out about 12 years in their career and help them find that employer where they can grow and advance and they feel they belong. And so we do that through data analytics, diversity recruitment, because people think that's where their issue is. Usually it's inside of your organization, and sometimes your data can help tell that, as well as some of your employee engagement. So that's really where we focus, is trying to tie data plus human behavior to create a culture of belonging within organizations.
All right, you can already tell. We have some fantastic background here on this panel, and what I really like is that you all three come from very different starting points. So let's start with level setting on the problem before we get into some of the tips and tricks. We know there is a shortage of talent. Demographically, birth rates are part of the problem, right? There's a shortage of talent, and this shortage is not going to go away. We're not just in a little dip that's going to improve. It's predicted to be a very long-lasting problem. Then you add on top of it that we're enlightened organizations are trying to build diversity in their organizations because they know they'll win if they have a diverse workforce that can drive that innovation. And they're struggling to figure out, you know, how do I even do that? Where do I start? So I'd like to just begin with the question and invite everybody to respond, but maybe we'll start with Maria. What are you seeing? I mean, what are you experiencing yourself and seeing in other organizations as the challenge today?
So I'm in a public housing authority right now, so maybe a little different, but I'm sure there's some commonalities. But as a public housing authority, obviously we're competing with the private sector, right? So we have some competition there, especially from an operational unit standpoint. The other challenges, of course, are, you know, how do we retain our high performers? How do we manage up or manage out our low performers, right? But the bigger issue right now is the remote work issue, right? So we've been in this pandemic, we were all out, and now we are actually going back to in person probably in June. So how do we recruit with that? How do we manage the remote workforce really and truly? And how do we prepare everyone to come back and we don't lose any really high potential staff because of that? Those are the challenges for us.
I'll let others chime in, but I will just respond to one thing that you said. I know in my own role as a people leader, this fear and this challenge of retention caused people sometimes to hang on to underperforming talent.
Absolutely.
Just because they were afraid they'll never find someone to fill the slot, and I'll take an underperformer versus having a vacancy, right? So I think you raised another very real issue that is a part of this talent shortage.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we work with that day in and day out. And I can tell you when, because of the pandemic and when we all went out to a completely 100% remote, I think a lot of those low performers, they rose to the top. People were very visible to be able to see that because then they're not there every day, you know, at least being able to, you know, communicate their way through the issues or maybe communicate differently. And, you know, when you're working remotely, there's a different level of output that has to occur. So a lot of those performers have come up. Some of those have left through attrition, and we're grateful for that, but we still have quite a few that we're trying to either, manage up, manage out, and that's really through the progressive discipline process.
Michelle?
I would say, especially in manufacturing and construction, you don't often have the opportunity, or a vast majority of your people won't have the opportunity to work remotely. Like if you're an engineer, you might be lucky if you can, but if you're on the floor for production, even as a professional, that's that's something you have to talk about within your organization. And I think it's really important to have these open discussions. People are calling them town halls. And I think being more transparent about what is going on in your organization, who has access to what, why do they have access to certain things, and really being clear really is something we're seeing when it comes to that talent retention. If you aren't sharing information, oftentimes with certain people at certain levels, like, well, we won't tell them, it'll be okay. They're like, not today, that's not what we're doing. And so it's really important to have these discussions on a regular basis and being more transparent with your organization. Some people still like they're leaving, they're probably gonna leave anyway, but it's really being more open about what's going on in the organization is what I found really helps a lot of traditional organizations where you can't do things more remotely, and we've been stuck in that mode the last 3 years anyway.
The other challenge is, you know, there's a war for diverse candidates. So everybody's willing to pay you top dollars to get those diverse candidates. But at the same time, you know, the new employees are getting a lot more pay, but the existing employees are seeing a pay disparity at this time. So that's become a challenge. And so the existing diverse candidates are leaving in large numbers.
I just want to help on that too. So we are paying diverse candidates more.
Yeah.
You know, there's to bring them in and help, you know, balance and make us more creative and thought leaders. But then they're also, and they're being paid more. We're, however, also having to do a lot of performance improvement with them as well. And so now I've got this, hey, I've invested in the company, and now I don't feel like you're investing in me, so I don't feel a sense of belonging. So now I just have I'm struggling with that. And so I just don't know if you guys have anything to say about that.
As a practitioner, I do, yeah. So we're limited, of course, by our budget, but we take a lot of really great strides to make sure we have some equity across the board, right? And if we're not paying at that same level, there needs to be a performance issue that's documented and on file on why we're not doing so. Or if we're paying a premium, you know, price for that candidate, is there another language that we're needing and we're requiring for a business reason? So we are really trying to tread very carefully in that area, but it can easily happen because people really are wanting those candidates immediately, as well as they want that diversity as well. But that's one way that we're actually resolving that issue. And I also want to add to something Michelle mentioned about hosting some of those town halls. We actually have a number of staff meetings. We actually announced for our staff to come back into the building 5 days a week. They were not happy. I think we could hear a pin drop, but that is for June. And the reason why is so that they can be prepared to come back because there are childcare issues. But I do agree with Michelle that you have to really communicate what the intent is so that people can be prepared to come back because people have made a lot of changes in their personal lives.
To add on to your question, you know, that is one of the issues that people are seeing. Now you have a lot of low-performing diverse candidates who are in your team, and now what do you do? So I think the best way to tackle this, as a company, we need to have data points, you know, and this is exactly why I need to collect data, because that is what's going to give us, that's what's going to, you know, let our leaders know that, yes, diversity is absolutely important, but we cannot compromise on quality. And so it's very important that we do start collecting those data and discussing that, not just with the leadership, but also consulting that with your recruiters and with everybody, with your data analytics team and all of that, you know, so make sure it's an inclusive discussion within your company.
So what I'll say, especially about the Black community, we speak very clear and to the point, and we often find that white people do not. And if you're saying, hey, we're having a disconnect, you're literally going to have to be very specific and detailed as to A, B, C. Not we'll just do the alphabets. Well, what language? And you're going to have to be very articulate that, document it, do Loom videos or screen recording of how to do certain things because they could literally be in a communication culturally that some people are very direct, other people are not, and I see this often having to do it, especially in construction. We had to be very specific to certain things, very different education levels. And it comes down to sometimes culturally, especially with room full of engineers, I was often the admin and I wasn't. How do you communicate different things to people? And you're gonna have to try different communication styles as a manager, as a leader within your organization to really see if it's a communication issue, if it's also a training issue. What I've also found is organizations do not give the same access to training to everybody in the organization, no matter their background or what they say that role requires. They will get locked out. And I lost an engineer, great engineer. He's a licensed professional engineer. Only one I had working on a transmission distribution line. Company bought into the office, transmission distribution, engineering training. They told him he couldn't go. Only one in his team, but he was the only black male engineer. I lost him in the middle of a billion-dollar project. And he told his boss, you can't keep me. When he resigned, he said, because I needed the training and you told me I couldn't have it. He went and asked to be included. So it's very, very important that when you make certain decisions, they understand why. And because then it looks like it's being held against them. So again, transparency, very crisp, clear. You may think it's clear, just let them ask questions and go from there and build from there.
These are great insights already, even just talking about the challenge that we're all facing. I mean, one of the things we've clearly pointed out here is the internal inequities that are resulting from the talent shortage and the highly competitive market where the job seekers have been in the driver's seat. And it's not just compensation, it's contribution and performance and how that gets managed in the long run. And of course, our focus today is to talk about and how do we find, yes, retain, but how do we find the talent that we need? And we have experts here who've worked in that field. So what are the tips and tricks? What kinds of things need to change about our traditional approaches to recruiting and talent acquisition that we need to sharpen the saw and become more effective and more competitive? And I'll start with you, Rachel, and we'll let everybody chime in.
I'm so glad we're talking about this because there are so many things, everybody in talent acquisition, we are looking for what's the fastest, what's the quickest way to get those diverse candidates. And we are always looking for the next shiny tool. Artificial intelligence is excellent. Those tools are excellent, but at the same time, nothing can compete with our human eye, right? So there are so many times when our diverse candidates are not being recognized by our AI tools. And it's great. AI tools are great if you want a woman or a person who is a veteran. But there are certain groups of people who are not being represented by these AI tools, like people who have disability. They are not picked up by these AI tools. And so I think as recruiters, if your talent acquisition, as diversity leaders, you need to make sure that there is a human element to your recruiting process, to your hiring and funneling process. So that's one of the areas. The other challenge what we see is a lot of companies have what is called token representation in, it's great that women are getting those seats at the table, that people of color are getting seats at the table. That's excellent, and we need that. But so not all, I don't want to generalize at this point, but there are certain companies where the CEO has stepped away from being a CEO and has a token person representing the company. So I think people see that you're not being genuine. They see that it's just a facade. And so I think it's important that organizations are true to believing and also living the culture and understanding that DEI is not a destination, it's a journey. So we need to work on this together. The other struggle, the other factor, what I notice is we need, again, data. I'm all about data because without data, it's all opinions, right? So some things that companies are doing very well are, they're using a lot of inclusive language for their job descriptions, which is excellent. Now, we're a staffing company, so one of my clients is a Fortune 10 company, and I can't really reveal the name, but I just to give you perspective of who they are a $120 billion company, and they have around 330,000 employees, so you can imagine it's a large company. Now they're collecting data. Now they're doing an internal comparative study to see, if job descriptions are actually making an impact. And this is going to ruffle some feathers here, but I do want to share this data with you. They found out that across different jobs, they found out when they use gender neutral job descriptions, they did not get as many diverse candidates as compared to a regular job description. So, it's a very preliminary data at this point, and I don't really have the liberty to give you more details, but if this is your company, just because it works for another company and it's the right thing to do, does not mean we all jump on the bandwagon. It's important that we do our own internal study and see what is working and what's not working, and to really share those data and to make it, known to everybody. All right, this is what is working for my company, but this is not working. And I think we all need to start sharing those data to see what is actually working and what's not.
I love this. I think you need to start internal, figuring out and documenting what your internal processes are, says the engineer. So, because it lends to a few things. Number one, you'll see what you're doing well, right? You may find out that you're actually diversifying your talent pipeline at the top, but as they go through the interview process, they're falling out. And it may be you're finding out they can't do a certain time of day when you're doing interviews between 12 and 3, like that school pickup, half a day at daycare, things like that. And you may find out you may need to do interviews at 7 a.m. And so you really need to look at what is your current internal process and trying to determine sometimes you can't, who's falling out of that process and where. And so really starting internal to your organization is really, really important. Then you can go back and determine where to go through and really test out, do an A/B testing to see, okay, is it job description title? Is it, we do panels now through the interview? Do we have one person who has stock questions and make sure everybody's asked the same questions? It's going to take a while. If you've ever studied how Boeing went through to really diversify their talent pipeline, it took them years, and they invested in it. But it was so many iterations they had to go through to really understand what works for them. And then again, it was only certain groups, not the entire organization, that you may find that it works for. I think it's also important to understand little blips of when you're seeing that influx of talent come in. You can say, oh, after we went to a certain event, we saw an increase in our talent pipeline, right? And it can be really, really hard if marketing and talent acquisition don't communicate. Often they do not communicate. So if you're running a campaign, even for Black Friday, for a facial cream or something, and I was like, oh my God, I've never heard of this company. Who are they? And end up on the job, you would be surprised how some people learn about you. And they decide, I should dig into this company, right? And that's how they end up applying for jobs. A lot of times what also is important is really focusing on how you communicate also in your organization and how that translates external to potential talent. And what I mean is when you talk about how you impact the world, how you service your customers rather, what does that look like and how does that translate? And we always talk about Coca-Cola, and people love it here in Georgia. You might have been a Coca-Cola scholar, got some money. And so it translates differently, right? As an employee or somebody that's handing out scholarships, you talk about the organization in a different way. And I think it's really important to understand how that translates outside of your organization to really attract talent. Again, it's something difficult to track, but it's still important that you have a culture where people understand the organization and they're happy about talking about the organization, and that translates in different communities and organizations and events like here at TAG to really attract that talent.
Yeah, so Rachel kind of talked a little bit about what needs to change on the recruiting side, but Michelle, you really added in how does the company attract people to this is a great place to work and this is a place where we value diversity.
So the only thing I will add is just really going back from the beginning and just being more intentional, right? So really more intentional about what sources, where you're recruiting from, But I definitely agree with Michelle and Rachel both. You have to have the analysis, right? So where we are currently is we're looking at our analysis, where are our applicants coming from? Because we've done a really good job of spreading out, going out to different organizations, associations, industry-specific groups, and so we've done that. But now, we want to see the proof in the pudding, right? So where are the applicants truly coming from? Where do we need to focus more on? And we're comparing that to the candidate data as well.
All great insights. I see a question here, so let me come back here and give you the mic.
So question/comment. So at AWS, I'm on the VDI team, but I met one of our other teams for database that was 50% female. So that was kind of a mic drop. And I was like, I went to one of the VPs and I was like, how did you guys do it? And she gave me 2 tips that I wanted to share with the room, but also get your feedback. So one of them was in the application process is really looking at the preferred versus the required qualifications. If you think about database, like, trying to attract women, that's probably not the field that they chose when they graduated college. So then, when you're trying to get someone with 5+ years of database experience, and they see that that's required, a woman's gonna just not apply. The second tip was to actually reach out one-on-one to potential candidates via LinkedIn, and for the recruiter to have like another female on the team reach out and to, in that early conversation, to mention what is the salary. Because women, if we're gonna make like a change, we might have, something going on with our family, we might be a mom, whatever it might be, we're gonna be, less likely to make that career change or maybe shift from one specialty to another specialty. But if we know we're gonna make double, triple, I'll keep talking to you. So those were 2 of the tips that I got from that database team, and my team's only 11% female, so it's something that, I'm hoping to kind of work with them to do that, but curious if that has resonated with you guys as well.
I will agree. I think what we try to do is really identify where those areas are that we need to improve upon, and then we come up with a plan, right? And so I think that's a great plan for that group. But we look at, based on the data that we have and the feedback that we've received also, we determine a plan on how we can achieve some more diversity in the group, whether it's by gender, race, disability, title, and so we really address it from that perspective. But I think those are really great ideas.
I absolutely agree. You need to limit what is required and what is optional. I have an argument with some people about this all the time. They'll give me a list of everything. I was like, if the hiring manager had to keep somebody, what is the reason they would want to keep the person on their team right now? Not if you had to hire someone, oh, well, they would have to have this, and if they knew they had to have somebody, that's how I usually have to get the VP of talent to tell me what the candidate really needs, or the hiring manager to limit it down. If everybody else was to quit, who would you need and why do you need them, right? And that usually gives me about 5. I usually try to get to around 5. Maybe 7 if it's something very unique to that organization. Salary, yeah, please. And again, oh, well, it depends. I'm not that old yet. I need you to give me a range because I'm going to get asked this question and people just stop responding, even if it looks like it's for them.
Kudos to you for asking, right? First noticing that diversity was there and saying, you must have done this intentionally. Share the tips with me. You have a question?
I had more of a statement, and I wanted to share, just as being a woman who has grown up through the ranks as a software developer, I think you have to grow them. Too often, we go to the same places, the same schools, Georgia Tech, and we look for great people. There's a equity thing at play, and everybody who looks like me can't go to Georgia Tech. And I think you have to be very intentional about growing the future pipeline of talent in order to get them where you want them to be. Hiring them because they're diverse does not mean that they are ready to perform at the level you need in your company. So of course you're going to have performance issues if you have not invested intentionally in mentoring them and to making sure they understand and they're working with others. And then the last thing working with others who can help them grow and are going to help them and not assuming that they're ready. As soon as you bring them in from a job program, like, no, they're not going to be ready. They're going to be introduced. And then the last thing I will say is representation matters, because I can tell you the number of times that I have opened my door to someone who is across the organization and they recognize there's someone who looks like them and they want to know more. And I've made myself available wherever I can to do that. But representation matters because you can't see. It's really hard for you to see become what you can't see.
That's a really great point. I really enjoyed listening to that. The other thing we see is, there's a lot of churn and burn. What that means is, a company will hire like a bunch of people for a contract and then they are fired. But instead, a lot of organizations can upskill our current employees and move them on to another project. So like you were talking about, it's very important that you actually help them with these kind of skills and try to utilize your current resources before you start hiring more people. So it's important that you just don't fire them. Try to see where else can we use them and what other different projects can we use these people.
I love your comment about developing the talent. If you're like me, 40s, tail end Gen Xers, you probably remember back in the day, GE was one of the places to go to train, get their people trained. And they knew people would come and steal their talent because they would not invest in developing their people. If you're going to invest in your people, you have a higher probability that they will stay. You also have a higher probability people are going to steal them. But it behooves me why we've gotten away from, more organizations have gotten away from really investing in their people. You are willing to invest in paying me to recruit for you than you are in developing that talent so you can retain it and you can grow it in that organization. It is much easier to attract somebody who looks like me to your organization than at a mid-management or executive level than it is to try to attract me to that organization. It's a different gameplay, and I try to sell it every day. They don't buy it. They rather just pay me to find somebody. But one day I'm going to find that person that really believes me. But because the women come to me and they're like, well, what does it look like? I've been to their website. I've looked through their brochures, and it's the same stock pictures. We know when we see the same 5 stock pictures that you probably didn't even pay for because you went to Women of Color STEM chat and got their free not STEM tech chat pictures. We know. And you're not even paying $39 for a stock image. So look, I deal with these women. This is my community. We talk about y'all. And we will not work for you like, ooh, do not. They didn't even spend the $39 for a picture. And you're wondering like, well, why can't you bring us somebody to interview? Like they see what you're doing from the outside and they don't trust you to even bother spending an hour to do an interview. So it's really, really important that you understand some of the things that you think are working are actually counterproductive. Whether they see everybody white and you say, we know we have an issue, these are the things we're doing, and have an honest conversation with them. But it's much easier to develop that talent, keep it, grow it, and let us be attracted to you.
Great answers. And yet it's a tough challenge when you're at the beginning stages of trying to build that diversity in your company.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Catchings with Cisco Systems. We are opening up a new office in Midtown in the Coda building, and we have a commitment to the city of Atlanta to hire 700 new full-time positions in the next 5 years. And that's a shameless plug for both the office and the talent. But that's exactly why I have the microphone right now. I would love to just hear from the 3 of you who are powerhouses in your field. What trends are you seeing now in hiring? Because I feel like everybody is really into diversity, because of the social unrest and and everyone's all in, and not saying that the talent hasn't been here. I mean, there's been excellent diverse talent here in Atlanta for decades. So I would just really love to know, what are you seeing now as what's hot? What are people looking for? Not necessarily just only racial or ethnic backgrounds, but just span the demographic, age, skills. Like, what are people asking for? Because I am curious.
And we're talking about from a candidate perspective,
Yes.
correct?
Mhm.
I mean,
She's curious what she's competing with, right?
I mean, we may be a little bit different from what they've found, but currently, I mean, honestly, we're competing with us being hybrid versus 100% remote versus face to face. Obviously, we support residents in the city of Atlanta. There are certain jobs that are really set to where you have to have face to face contact with our residents, and so it's a no brainer, right? And so that's probably the biggest issue for us right now. It's probably even easier for us to find someone that wants to serve the community, right? But that for us is probably a bigger issue.
Yep. A trend that's working in your favor or not in your favor? Okay, the return to office, especially if you're targeting women, even if they don't have children. I'm a caregiver for a 75-year-old, and sometimes I need to escape. But I had my mask on for a reason. I got to go quarantine because my siblings won't come for me if I get her sick. But it's really understanding that trend. More of your competitors are going back to the office. Understanding the women you're targeting, are they willing to return to office, and at what level? Is it 5 days a week, 3 days a week, 1 day a week? And really understanding if you may be able to say, oh, my competitor's going back to office. Let me see how much of their talent's willing to come over. We're fully remote. That's the one thing I'm seeing more people starting to look. The next trend I've seen, and it's still really strong, is them still looking for mid-management to executive. Also, I've seen more people focus on disabled people as well, understanding that they can now tap into a talent and really change their poverty level because they're focused on people who are disabled, whether it's physically, mentally, but they have that opportunity. I'm seeing more people asking those questions and really looking to figure out how to tie into the talent. The disconnect then, of course, is, oh, well, they're not trained. Nobody would hire them. Much less, they learned Fortran 15 years ago or 20 years ago and never had that opportunity. And so I'm seeing those trends where they're looking at marginalized people in different ways and different categories, and finally realize if we have something remote, we're able to get this talent that has never been tapped into. And we talked about that gap in the workforce. I will tell you, the gap is because we looked at able-bodied, educated people and highly trained, meaning military as well, and we have not looked at the disenfranchised very early on. So if we look at an early talent pipeline, looking at foster care, when those children are 18, they're dropped off. They have nothing, and oftentimes nobody but who they went through the foster care system with. So if you're looking to tie into people that are talented, that have a reason to be here, they want to stay in Atlanta or the Georgia as a state, this is a really good opportunity to pipeline those students in, those young people in early right now, and really get them trained into your software, whether it's Salesforce or something else, very, very early.
Thank you, Michelle. That's one of the encouraging things, right, of reinventing how work gets done and really not being able to find the talent we need the old-fashioned way. It's forcing companies to really think differently and about different sources of talent than what we've been willing to accept before. We have another question back here, and I think this might be our last one.
I'll make it quick. Charlinda, good to see you again. Couple pieces of information I want to share that probably make everybody think a little bit after this meeting is that 60% of the recruiting workforce are women, which is interesting when we're here talking about the challenges of women getting into professional positions. Also, 87% of the employee services industry are women. And all this can be found in the Bureau of Statistics and all that stuff. So I think it's interesting that, and I even just did a count in this room earlier, 33% of the people in here are men. So we're even looking at, even in this topic, it's women dominated. So I would wonder what that where the communication needs to be communicated up to the decision makers that are deciding on how we screen male and female candidates. I think it has to go way up to the top to where the men are dominating these roles, making the decisions. And let's face it, you all have, in my opinion, as much influence as possible. But I wanted to ask Maria, did I say it right?
Sure, yes.
Did I destroy it? I'm
Maria.
sorry.
That's okay.
My name's Chris. My question to you is, so being in recruiting for a long time, and I'll try to hurry this up, Equifax, NCR, and I don't mind calling these companies out, they're losing a lot of people because they're requiring people to come to the office 3 to 5 days a week.
Yep.
And since you're going to be here, Charlinda,
I think that's a source.
in that neighborhood, yep. Right. There it is. Good. Right.
I think you got a source going right now.
Yeah.
So
I was a talent acquisition consultant for Amazon for a year or two, and I saw the same challenges trying to recruit from all over the country. But my question is, and if it's your decision or someone else's, what is the benefit to the employees that they're requiring them to come in 5 days a week? I understand, and I'll finish this, I feel like from talking to senior leaders that have teams coming in, and I hate to call it, I'm not going to say any names or anything, but I feel like it's kind of an egotistical thing. I'm a manager. I've got 45 people under me. I want to see all these people. It makes me feel good and powerful, right? I mean, some people are, do find that beneficial, and they're, have you ever had people who don't want to take a job if they're not like managing people? So I'm wondering, is it employee benefit that this is becoming a mandatory thing, or is it more of a company like, where does that come in?
in this situation, it's more of a performance-based issue. So and it's not my decision. My input is hybrid. Number one, from a recruiting standpoint, it makes it a lot easier for us to recruit immediately, right? And really and truly what I'm pushing is more of it should be based on the person's performance. It's a perk, not a right? And so each business unit should manage it that way. But our executive team decided to, that was the push at this point in time. We're hoping we can change that to hybrid, we think. But the issue was performance. We have a lot of people who were out working 100% remote. We've gotten wind that they're, working other jobs. Their performance level is not to what it used to be, and it was a decline. And it's just a lack of communication while you're out working remotely, quite frankly. And so they believe that this is the best way to address it. I don't necessarily agree, but that's where we are today.
I agree. As somebody who talks to a lot of candidates, I've spoken to numerous candidates, and there's a lot of fraud that's happening lately. There are people who are working in East Coast, and they have been employed with companies in the East Coast and also in West Coast. So people are making around $450,000 when their actual primary job is a $250,000 or $150,000. So there's a lot of fraud, and companies sees that. Some companies are aware of that. So the way they do this is, in East Coast, we wake up 3 hours early. So when they have their early morning meetings, that's at 9 a.m. here, and by 12 p.m. our time, they are able to have their meetings in the West Coast time zone. So there's a lot of fraud, and I've personally spoken to a lot of people who are looking for their second and third jobs. So I think it's just not fair to the companies. And yes, it does not apply to everybody, because there are some sincere people who appreciate not having to travel into the offices, not having to travel, an hour and two, and who are actually way more productive than going into an office. But we do have those outliners who are looking at finding their third jobs. And so because of that, I think we can't hate on the companies who are asking you to come back into the offices.
Well, thank you all. Thanks to I'm sorry, I want to let Michelle chime in.
So I'm the counter person. I always ask the employers, what aren't you doing correctly when your employees are working multiple jobs? From a family where I don't know how many of you grew up, both of my parents have college degrees, but they always worked more than one job. You didn't have a problem when you weren't paying enough for them to support their family and went and worked a part-time job and weren't getting enough sleep. But now their productivity, and they came to work, their productivity probably was the same anyway. And so I really encourage employers to really look at what processes you have in place to support your employees to work remotely. Some people, job went remote and they were already in a domestic violence situation. And so it's worse. So they may actually need to come into the office. And so you need to be having one-on-one discussions with your employees. They may have had a lot of people in their community, their family died during COVID, and they're going through some mental challenges right now, emotional challenges. You still haven't touched base with them. So I think it's really important to understand as an employer, what do you owe your employees to make sure they're able to still go through and handle what life has given them, especially in the last 3 years, as opposed to say, oh, well, you have to come in the office because your productivity is low. You have been disconnected to them often. I worked on remote teams for over a decade. I loved it. I learned how to thrive, how to communicate with my engineers. My business manager never met. He was telling me what car he bought, how he was going to get engaged with somebody. They broke up. People I only talk to on the phone and WebEx. So it's really, really important that you figure out how to better communicate with your employees, understand what tools and tactics and systems they really need to thrive before you decide whether or not having them return to the office full-time, part-time, or whatever hybrid you have before you make that decision, because you really may find out you're doing something that's counterproductive not only to your organization but to that employee that has trusted you to really give them the benefit of the doubt.
That's an excellent ad. Thank you so much. I think we've covered so many of the challenges and some of the tips and tricks in this environment that's constantly changing, but I know I heard for sure, understand what you really require in your job, then understand what that candidate really requires to create a match that will increase belonging in the organization so that you can retain them. So thank you all for the great questions and commentary, and thanks to my panelists.